Welcome to the Strategic Momentum Podcast, Episode 5. I'm your host, Connie Steele. Every other week, we share tips, stories, and advice from progressive leaders and how they've been able to break through their business inertia and propel their business forward. There's a lot of talk about implementing Agile on the commercial side, but today's guest, Choi, President and CEO of VerticalApps, is tackling the daunting task of facilitating Agile transformation in the federal government. Will launched his IT consultancy in 2010, and since then, he's been servicing private and public sector clients to address their most pressing technology needs. He shares his perspective and advice for creating momentum and implementing Agile in the federal government. Thanks for being on the show today, Will.
Thanks, Connie. I appreciate the opportunity to join you.
So you have a really interesting story. You were an executive in the tech industry and specifically on the commercial side for years before venturing off on your own. Tell us the story of what led you to take a different route in your career and what have you learned during that journey?
Well, I would say that before I started my company, VerticalApps, I was the consummate professional. I did everything that was asked of me by my senior leadership, and I wanted to be perfect at that. I had a number of years under my belt in terms of working with senior leadership in a program management, product development, and software development standpoint, and the products that we worked on touched over 30 million users worldwide. And the experience that I gained at a number of these commercial companies, and the last place where I was at AOL, where I left as a VP of product development and program management. I knew that I could take everything that I've learned as well as the context that I've gained along the way and make something out of it, start my own company, and build a product development company from the ground up. And, I think a lot of this goes back to maybe my biggest influence for starting the company is probably my parents. They both immigrated to the U.S. From South Korea when I was very young. They both took the entrepreneurial route and started their own businesses along the way. Some were successful, some weren't. But they really taught me about risk-taking, about having a strong work ethic, and bouncing back after breakdowns. And so by the time I left AOL in 2010, when we started our company, I had a strong itch to go out on my own, leverage the skills, experience, and professional contacts that I'd made over the years. I figured if my parents could come to a country where they didn't have much money, could barely speak English, didn't have much of a support structure, and they were still able to get by and raise a family, then I knew I would regret it later in life if I didn't at least try this.
I think when you meet a lot of entrepreneurs like yourself, that notion of risk-taking, this ethic of hard work and being able to, fulfill a need and see that opportunity to create something bigger than yourself is something very inspirational for, many people to hear about. So that entrepreneurial spirit is certainly something that you've applied to vertical applications. So why don't you tell everybody a little bit more about vertical applications too?
Yeah, so it's funny when I first started out, and I've been in the commercial space for almost my entire career. We thought that we could easily take what we'd learned and start a application development company, basically a software development company, product development company. And I found out real quickly, probably within the first couple of weeks, that there are a lot of product development companies and software development companies in the DC area. We had to actually spin it pretty quickly into more of a services company. So we went back to our program project management route because we knew that it would be really difficult to compete with all of these other software development companies that were, probably bigger, had a stronger bench than us, and had already made a name for themselves. And when we started our company in 2010, it was a crazy time because the country was in the middle of a deep recession. And it was actually a couple of years away from a global financial crisis. So In hindsight, would I have started it at that time? Maybe I would have. I'm glad I actually didn't know any better, to be honest with you.
Ignorance is bliss, right?
Right, correct.
Let's talk about how the government is focusing on technology to improve their services. Obviously, this is a sector that you guys specifically focus on. What do you feel has been the most common challenges that have inhibited your clients from fulfilling their technology goals?
I think the biggest challenge that I've seen is probably more cultural in nature. I think there have been ways of doing the certain things for a long time, and I think especially in the government space, but of course even in the commercial and nonprofit sectors as well, there's a resistance to change, and that is not just something that I think is at the individual level; it's at the senior leadership level as well. So that's probably the biggest thing that I see. It's I don't know if you want to call it the fear of the unknown or the uncertainty of what could go wrong. I just think that people are used to business as usual, and I think it's human nature.
How do you and your colleagues at VerticalApps help people manage through this fear and work with them to move them forward? Because I'm sure there's quite a bit of inertia related to fear.
I think people need to understand it and identify and agree that there is a need to change. Sometimes it takes people a little longer to realize that. I think some people need some help along the way. One of the things that we focus on is less words and more action. So, and I think more and more you're seeing a lot of that. Well, you see it most places these days. The days of walking into a room and showing people a beautiful PowerPoint deck and then getting business. Those days are over. People are they want you. They're becoming more show me folks, right? Show me how this works. How is this going to work? How has it worked before? I want to see an example. If you have something specific, like a demonstration, I would like to see that. And so that's one of the things that I think that we're good at. We tend to be roll up your sleeves, been there, done that, folks, and we want to actually work side by side and partner with our clients. Because at the end of the day, talk is cheap, and if you can't demonstrate that you can help them meet their business goals, you're not going to be there for long.
Right. So, can you give me potentially an example of how you show them and how you work alongside with them to demonstrate how to move forward in any potential IT program or initiative? What are some of the steps that you do? How do you convince them along the way? How do you make them comfortable so they can start piecing together step A to B to C and how that actually results in something tangible?
Well, I'm not, and I've really never been a fan of the Big Bang. And one of the things that we tend not to do is sell people on the future and then tell them they have to wait, 6 months or more until they can actually see something. So the best way to do it is in an incremental way. A lot of consultancies, especially some of the bigger ones, they spend a lot of time on, I think what they might call it a discovery phase. So they'll interview a whole bunch of people and they'll go and they'll bring an army of folks in. And we just don't work that way. We just want to go in. We want to understand the need. We want to understand who the key decision makers are. And we like to actually get in a room. There's a concept called minimum viable products, MVPs. Mm-hmm. So we'll actually work with them to identify and put together an MVP. It's something that could actually be put together in a matter of weeks, not months. And they can actually see something that's tangible that they can really relate to so that they could help justify why moving towards, an Agile development process might be better for them. Because Agile is all about speed, both in thinking and doing. and doing things that are of high value. So in the past, or in traditional software development, you have a typical process where you spend a lot of time, gathering requirements, and then once the requirements are signed off, you go into a design phase, and then once the design's signed off, you go into the next phase, and it's just a handoff process that takes a lot of time. In the federal government, that process takes months and sometimes years. So by the time you actually have completed your system, and it might tick and tie to all the requirements that were created 2 years ago, it might actually not meet the requirements anymore because, as you know, the environment changes, regulations change, users and behaviors change, and people look back and think, "Wow, we just spent all this time and money, and it doesn't even meet the need of our users." So it's really more about doing things in a way where you're front-loading the high-value stuff and then rolling things out in an iterative fashion so that the most important things are deployed first. Mm-hmm. And I would add, like, another challenge I see right now, maybe more on the government side, but still across all industries, is a lack of appreciation for a user-centered design.
Right.
And so one of the things that we want to include in our process is having the user be part of the working team. So you're not actually building something for someone else. You're actually building something with a user, someone who's actually going to use the system. Everything needs to be designed with the user and users in mind, because there are going to be users that are going to be different.
Right. So obviously, a lot of things to consider in order to help them really get to that first MVP too, to ensure that it is focused on the user. I want to go back to one thing that you said, which was around rolling out the things that are really of high value, and obviously doing that in an incremental way. How do you get folks on the team, your clients, to constantly focus on what is high value? Because different people on a team have different perspectives of what is high value and what isn't. So how do you get them to prioritize the right things?
We really need someone on the quote unquote business side to join these teams. And generally it's someone that they're generally referred to as a product owner. That person is the general manager for a particular product. And when it comes to developing and deploying a go-to-market strategy, that person is basically responsible for the profit and loss of a product and the success of that particular product. There might not be a notion of profitability per se in the federal government, but there still needs to be someone who can represent the business need, put together a business case, even get to a point where each capability, feature, or functionality has a value assigned to it. It could be financial, it could be a cost savings, but it could be qualitative. In the Agile development process, it's much more different because you're working from a backlog of needs. And if the product owner is doing a good job, then he or she is basically, they're the ones who are assessing the value based on, again, it all comes back to the users, right? So if the users are telling you that one capability is more important than another, and you understand the user base, you understand exactly what they will be doing on the system, and it should be pretty easy for the product owner to identify which are more high value features and functionality than other ones.
Based on your earlier point of trying to wrangle this notion of fear of creating this agile development process, would you say that getting the product owner, the business owner, to fundamentally address their fear and understand what could be limiting sets the stage and sets the momentum for the rest of the team to see the value and opportunities of moving towards, a new process like this?
Yeah, there's no question. The product owner would set the tone, or the GM, and of course, his or her leadership chain all the way to the top of the organization. It really does start from the top, and it's one of the things that I always argue. If you can't get buy-in from senior leadership, any type of organizational change or transformation is going to be really hard. But once you get the buy-in from senior leadership, it really needs to flow more on the business side. One of the things that's important is that when you put together these agile teams, they need to be fully dedicated, fully on board, and that's really like the only way you can make this work and make sure that you can have the velocity that you want in terms of getting your product out fast. The federal government, they recognize this need for agile practices. And 3 years ago, 2014, the federal government created the U.S. Digital Service, and it's part of the Executive Office of the President. It's important for listeners to know that the government's actually doing something about it. And it's only been 3 years. What the U.S. Digital Service has done is they've created standards and guidelines and materials that are publicly available to government employees and federal contractors, to include what they call a digital service playbook for how to actually go about developing a digital product for the federal government.
Right.
And so part of this agile transformation that we are a proponent on is not just on the development side, it's also, and not just on the business side, it's for all of the organizations in the federal government: legal, contracting, policy, information assurance, public affairs. They all need to change their thinking and their mindset to support this for the skids to be really greased. I think there's a huge trend to move in this direction, but it's taking time.
Right. And I think that, with anything this significant, it does take a lot of time, a lot of coaxing, a lot of education to help move people along. It's certainly a totally different way of working. And it's not just a dynamic that is happening in the government space, but certainly still something that happens in the commercial space as well. Thanks so much for being on the show today. A lot of great tips and advice on how to kind of create that momentum in terms of building the right technology in the government.
Thanks a lot, Connie, for having me. Appreciate it.
As technology develops and human behavior changes, every organization needs to embrace some degree of agile transformation. Breaking through the inertia takes more than just a vague promise of productivity and improved product experiences. It takes ongoing proof and buy-in, not just from above, but also below and across every level of an organization to change a deeply embedded culture. And it's about developing the things that the actual user and business prioritize most. Thanks for listening to the Strategic Momentum Podcast. To learn more about Will and VerticalApps, go to VerticalApps.com, spelled VerticalApps.com. If you want to hear previous episodes or even get show notes from this episode, visit us on our podcast page at flywheelassociates.com/podcast. I'm Connie Steele, and you've been listening to the Strategic Momentum Podcast.